VCY America presents Crosstalk, a nationwide call-in program discussing issues that have an effect on our families, our communities, our churches, our nation, and our world. Crosstalk, an opportunity for you to voice your concerns for biblical principles. And now live by satellite and around the world on the internet at vcyamerica.org. Here is today's Crosstalk.
Well, thank you, Mr. Morris, and good to be with you today on Crosstalk, where we have, I cannot believe all of the things that are happening in our world. I again recite my special little line. I believe that the inmates have taken over the asylum. Sometimes you begin to wonder, but this is one day when it appears that way. We're going to get to it, but first I want to touch on an item. We had hoped to have a guest on the air on this, but because of late contacts, we're not able to coordinate this from our side of this. And so I'm just going to share this vital information. There is a gentleman whose name is Kah-sum Ruh-sheed. He is a vocal human rights activist and an advocate of what is called moderate Islam in America. He's the executive director of the Richmond Journal of Global Law and Business, and has co-authored or co-edited 2 books, Toward a Greater Jihad and By the Dawn's Early Light. He has been featured in local and national news media, including NBC and NPR. That figures my comments. He is out promoting what I would call the deception of Sharia, discussing this issue. Unbelievable, as we share his letter. Here's the letter that Mr. Kah-sum Ruh-sheed. First of all, the question was, what does Sharia mean? Now, this is asking Mr. Kah-sum Ruh-sheed what this means. He was asked this, and his answer is, Sharia is the law of the Quran, and literally means a path of life-giving water. In fact, the word yara, the root of the Hebrew word Torah, means precisely the same thing. Therefore, Sharia is actually ingrained in Abrahamic tradition. Now, this is coming from a Muslim. Sharia is composed of 5 main branches: behavior, morals and manners, ritual worship, beliefs, and transactions and contracts, and punishments. These branches combine to create a social or a society based on justice, pluralism, and equity for every member of that society. Now, folks, they're talking about Sharia law. Furthermore, this missionary of Sharia law has gone on and published this. He said, Sharia forbids that it be imposed on any unwilling person. Did you hear that? This missionary is literally, in my opinion, deceiving people. He's saying Sharia forbids that it be imposed on any unwilling person. Islam's founder, Prophet Muhammad, demonstrated that Sharia may only be applied if people willingly apply it to themselves, never through forced government implementation. That doesn't sound right to me, not what I understand. Well, I'll go on and read more. This gentleman, also a missionary of Islam and a missionary of Sharia law, peddling it here in the United States, says, additionally, the Quran does not promote any specific form, but requires that the form people choose is based on aji, or absolute justice. The Quran says, and I'm quoting him now, verily Allah enjoins justice and the doing of good to others, in giving like kindred, and forbids indecency and manifest evil and transgression. He admonishes you that you may take heed. Now, this is the man that I call the missionary Qasim Rashind, promoting Sharia law here in the United States. Notice, he says, religious preference is never mentioned. For example, in the ruling with absolute justice, the righteous Jewish King Solomon ruled as a just monarch based on his fundamental principles of Sharia law, or justice. Who's adding to this story? The next question to this gentleman, this missionary of Sharia: do Muslims want Sharia to rule America? Now his answer is this: no. Remember that the Quran teaches that religion must not be a matter of the state. Sharia is a personal relationship with God. The Prophet Muhammad, even as the de facto ruler of Arabia, wrote the Charter of Medina, in which the Muslims were held to Sharia laws and Jews to the law of the Torah. Not a single non-Muslim was held to Sharia, because Sharia itself forbids compulsion. The Quran clearly states there is no compulsion in religion. Furthermore, Sharia obligates Muslims to be loyal to their nation of residence. Therefore, American Muslims must adhere to the U.S. Constitution as the supreme law of the land. The third question, going to this missionary of Sharia: if Muslims don't want Sharia to rule America, then so what if it's banned? Well, first, Sharia is a personal relationship between a Muslim and God. The First Amendment forbids Congress from passing laws that restrict the free exercise of religion, particularly private exercise. Second, if Sharia were banned, American Muslims could not marry, inherit, or write wills, or choose to divorce per Islamic's guidelines. If similar restrictions were imposed on other faith groups, then no minister could conduct a marriage ceremony, no Catholic bishop could read the last rites, and no rabbi could perform circumcision on an infant male Jewish child, because these are all Judeo-Christian laws. Even within our legal system, says the writer, American Jews regularly resolve personal and financial matters through the rabbinical courts, and American Muslims simply want to enjoy the same constitutionally guaranteed rights. Interesting, folks. Here is a man, Kah-sum Ruh-sheed, who is going about in our country publishing this kind of material to confuse, literally, these are the antithesis of what you see happening under Sharia law. And now get this here. It's in item 4. What does Sharia say about other religions? Well, Sharia law champions absolute freedom of conscience and freedom of religion. For example, the Quran goes as far as to oblige Muslims to fight on behalf of Jews, Christians, and people of other faiths, and to protect their churches, synagogues, and temples from attack. My comments here: that's interesting. What about the Islamic gunships that came down through the Sudan, burning schools and churches and killing people with the machine guns running and bodies laying all over the place? Somewhere there's a problem in the wiring here somewhere. Well, the article goes on. Furthermore, Sharia holds that to be a Muslim, a person must testify to the truth of all past prophets, including Jesus, Moses, Abraham, Krishna, and Buddha, and must respect their adherents. When Prophet Muhammad peacefully became the ruler of Arabia, his primary condition for non-Muslims and Muslims to reside in Arabia was that they allow all people of all faiths, be they Jews, Christians, Muslims, or idol worshippers, to worship in peace and without oppression. The fifth question: what about the countries that oppose people and claim they follow Sharia? Such countries have ignored the fundamental tenet of justice inherent in Sharia law and have instead used Sharia as an excuse to gain power and sanction religious extremism. To be sure, not a single example of a Sharia-compliant country exists. In fact, the most Muslim country in the world is likely America, because America guarantees freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and freedom of thought, all hallmarks of Sharia law? My question there. Those nations that oppress in the name of Sharia are as justified in their claims as the slave owners who claimed their right to slavery was based on the Bible. And as for the Quran's violent verses, extremists and critics alike cite honest legal interpretation abhors quoting an excerpt as a means to understand the full law. Unfortunately, both the extremists and the critics refuse to adhere to this basic principle. In some, Sharia law guides a Muslim's personal relationship to God, and just as the Old and New Testament guide Jews and Christians in their personal relationships with God, these paths to life-giving water are nothing to fear. Folks, this kind of stuff is being promoted by a missionary of Sharia law. His name is Qasim Rashind. And how many of the people in the drive-by media are swallowing this stuff hook, line, and sinker? This is absolutely unbelievable. But may I say that if we go about not knowing what the real Sharia law stands for, why is it that Sharia law calls for a woman who may be caught in an immoral sin to be buried up to her neck, and then the rocks being thrown at her as she is executed by stoning, buried with only her head protruding or her shoulders protruding from the ground? What about the beheading of the broadcaster's wife here in the United States, where he had a disagreement over theological matters? What about the man who took his Jeep and drove into his teenage daughter because she had become too westernized, and an honor killing was needed? Folks, I'm not trying to be sarcastic, but when I see missionaries doing exactly what Islam promotes, giving falsehood out so that people would be able to receive the message and be convinced that it is not a violent religion, but that Islam is a form of peace. Are you convinced? I'm not. We're going to be taking a moment's break coming up here shortly, but there are things happening all over the country. And interestingly enough, the president and French President Nicolas Sarkozy were standing with their wireless mics on, and apparently forgot they were on. And what happened is that their comments were recorded. The conversation drifted to Netanyahu as the two were talking, at which time Sarkozy declared, "I cannot stand him. He is a liar," according to the report. Obama then replied, "You're fed up with him? But I have to deal with him every day."
Genesis with Dr. John Morris, creation scientist with ICR. Dr. Morris, we talk a lot about DNA. What's junk DNA?
Chris, junk DNA is the name given to certain portions of our genetic code which don't seem to work in the common fashion. Now, evolutionists have said that this is evidence for evolution, that certain things have been discarded by natural selection, and now we just see the remnant. But this is an argument from ignorance. Just because we don't know what something does doesn't mean that it doesn't do anything. And now that we've researched it more, we've found quite a few functions that this junk DNA actually performs. It repairs and replaces mutated genes. It even takes over under times of undue stress. I'm convinced that even the junk DNA is created by God and very important from His perspective. At least that's the perspective that I get from going back to Genesis.
For more on Genesis, call 1-800-7-GENESIS. That's 1-800-743-6374.
welcome back to Crosstalk. We were sharing moments ago the report that came from, well, when the French President, Nicolas Sarkozy, was on mic. Wireless microphones accidentally left on after the G20 meeting picked up private conversations between U.S. French President and between the U.S. and French President. And Sarkozy admits in that recording he can't stand Israeli Premier. That's right. Netanyahu is, as he says, he can't stand him. And Obama comes back, of course, with his comments. He says, "You're fed up with him. I have to deal with him every day." What kind of talk is this going on? I mean, could it be that all these dignified statements of cooperation with Israel and the president, well, after all, it was the president who met with Mr. Netanyahu and then just walked out of the room and left him sitting there as he went to supper. He refuses to have his picture taken under certain circumstances with Benjamin Netanyahu. Yes, we're friends with Israel. Question mark? Quote marks? Interesting. Well, we're going to move along because we're going to open our phone lines in a little bit and you can make your comments. Talking about this Occupy thing. Well, I'm occupying this studio today because I'm the only one here. And I'm not throwing a fit over not having the accommodations here. I mean, I'm not going to sleep in the studio. I'm not going to, have supper or lunch in here. I'm talking on a microphone. I'm occupying the studio, okay? The Lord says in His Word for Christians to occupy this world till He comes. An occupation means that we're doing something. We're not just sitting like a bump on a log, but we're here and allowing the Holy Spirit of God to motivate our hearts and use us as witnesses. Well, now, taking the word occupy to the furthest reaches, the New York Post gives a story, their Saturday paper, and it talks about a protester who threw a fit at McDonald's when he couldn't get free food. Listen to this. A Zuccotti Park protester threw a violent fit at McDonald's yesterday after the employees refused to give him free food. Now, his name is Fisika Bezav. It's Swedish. I can't pronounce it, okay? No, it's not Swedish. You know that. He's 27 years old. He ripped a credit card reader from the counter and threw it at the workers at about 2:30 in the morning at McDonald's. And obviously, it's become, at 160 Broadway, it's become a bathroom spot for protesters. No one was hurt, but he was seen hanging out with protesters in the occupied park. And police sources said that he has been charged with criminal mischief. Now, a McDonald's spokesperson said that it is still an ongoing police investigation and we're cooperating with the police. But throwing a tantrum because there was no food to provide them to occupy. Interesting. You see this occupation, and there are pictures of these people. Some of them wear masks because if they do something criminal and the video cameras capture them, I see 3 of them appearing to wear masks that could emulate the devil. But whatever it is, here's masked demonstrators outside of St. Paul's Cathedral, which, folks, I'm not promoting Catholicism by saying this, but the cathedral has been used as a human waste dump, as protesters have gone in and defecated all over the property. Cathedral workers have met senior clergy to vent their feelings over the cleanup. And St. Paul's has blamed hangers-on and not protesters at the tented camp, which closed one of London's most iconic attractions for a number of days last month. But there you have the church trying to clean up the mess after it was visited by those who say we shall occupy. What about this? I mean, people certainly have a right to gather and to assemble peacefully, but the total disregard for decency and morality and with crude behavior, and then, of course, taking paint and silver paint and using it as they would mark up the walls, all of this under the label of protest. Well, in England, this is Wally Harris, 91, went to the cathedral to ask the activists to move their tents so that the city of London, his city, could parade in honor of their fallen comrades. Now, this former Rolls-Royce mechanic from Bracknell, Berkshire, won the Military Medal for Gallantry after he fought on Gold Beach in Normandy on D-Day and was part of the force that liberated Brussels. He said, "I thought I was in London and it was close to my heart. I wanted to talk to them to see what their intention is to use the space on Remembrance Sunday. And haven't they got any respect for what happened all these years ago? And 1 million people lost their lives, and can't they move their tents to allow us to have the parade?" I tell you what, nobody wants to do anything except stand there and occupy. Well, we're going to talk about occupation in our program in a bit. There are other stories here, stories that are really, well, here's another one where people throwing tantrums because they didn't get enough food. Occupy America. Jew hatred, rape, defecation in the banks and in front of people's homes, in churches and on police cars. And it's, accordingly, it is said that it's Obama endorsed because he said the protesters had a right to do what they do. Well, Portland, Oregon, police arrested 2 people at the Occupy Portland camp Sunday and dealt with several more incidents, including a man who grew angry when a pizza restaurant ran out of breadsticks. Yeah, his name was Barry Joe Stull, 53 years old. He was arrested after menacing a member of the Occupy Portland security staff with a hammer. Stull was booked into the Multnomah County Jail on menacing and trespassing charges. That's really the spirit of occupancy, isn't it? The police said also additionally that a pedestrian walking by the camp was confronted by several young people wearing bandanas on their faces. One of the suspects pulled a knife on the victim, while another tried to punch him in the face, police said. Oh, yes, all of this to demonstrate or to occupy. Well, there are provocative things happening, and I have a story here that I think you'll find interesting. The title is, Obama Can't Wait, His New Christmas Tree Tax. You said, what? Well, this is by David Addington. President Obama's Agriculture Department today announced that it will impose a new 15-cent charge on all fresh Christmas trees. Did you hear that? The Christmas tree tax to support a new federal program to improve the image and marketing of Christmas trees. I cannot believe this, folks. In the Federal Register of November 8, 2011, Acting Administrator of Agricultural Marketing David R. Shipman announced that the Secretary of Agriculture will appoint a Christmas tree promotion board. We have to promote Christmas trees? The purpose of the board is to run a program of promotion, research, evaluation, and information designed to strengthen the Christmas tree industry's position in the marketplace, maintain and expand existing markets for Christmas trees, and to carry out programs and plans and projects designed to provide maximum benefits to the Christmas tree industry. And the program of information is to include efforts to enhance the image of Christmas trees and the Christmas tree industry in the United States. To pay for the new Christmas tree image improvement and marketing program, the Department of Agriculture imposed a 15-cent fee on all sales of fresh Christmas trees by sellers of more than 500 trees per year. And, of course, the Christmas tree sellers are free to pass along the 15-cent federal fee to consumers who buy their Christmas trees. Figure this out. As I said before, it seems to me that the asylum is being taken over by the inmates. Let's go across the sea. From WorldNet Daily's Jerusalem Bureau, nuclear jitters, Iran prepping for missile attack on Israel. You heard me, attack on Israel. Iran has been preparing Palestinian terrorist groups in the Gaza Strip and Hezbollah in Lebanon to retaliate in case Israel strikes against Tehran's nuclear sites, according to Egyptian security officials speaking to WorldNet Daily. The security officials said that Tehran was convinced that the Jewish state was going to attack its suspected nuclear sites in September, prompting Iran to hold joint military drills with Gaza's Jihad groups in August, including Hamas and Islamic Jihad. Similar drills were held in August with Hezbollah militants in Lebanon. Those drills were conducted by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard members, and the officials said that the exercises focused largely on coordinated missile onslaughts from both Gaza and Lebanon aimed at blanketing the Jewish. According to the Egyptian security officials, any attack against Iran or Syria would result in an immediate Iranian missile campaign against Israel using proxies in Gaza and Lebanon. Folks, we need to pray for Israel. We need to pray for Benjamin Netanyahu and all of those who are there being faced with these humongous challenges. Now, you can't shake your fist in God's face for too long. But apparently our present administration, under the direction of our president, opposes prayer at the World War II memorial. That's right. Republican lawmakers and conservative activists are expressing outrage. Get that? Republican lawmakers and conservative activists expressing outrage after the Obama administration announced its objection to adding President Franklin Roosevelt's D-Day prayer to the World War II memorial in Washington, D.C. The objection was noted during a congressional hearing on Representative Bill Johnson's bill, the World War II Memorial Prayer Act of 2011. Comments were that it's unconscionable that the Obama administration would stand in the way of honoring our nation's distinguished World War II veterans. President Roosevelt's prayer gave solace, comfort, and strength to our nation and brave warriors who fought against tyranny and oppression. Roosevelt asked the nation to join him in prayer as the U.S. and Allied troops launched the invasion that led to the defeat of the Nazi Germany. He asked God to give the Allied troops courage and faith, saying, "With thy blessing we shall prevail over the unholy forces of our enemy." But our president and his administration want that prayer removed and expunged. They don't want that there in the memorial of World War II. We'll be right back.
For millions of Christians around the world, following Christ can be painful, even deadly. Yet the church continues to thrive in the most difficult places. What can we learn from these oppressed believers? How do they pray for those in authority? What is their attitude toward government and political power? What does worship mean to them? Where do they find their strength and joy? These and other questions are addressed in the book, The Privilege of Persecution. Drawing on real-life stories and key scriptures, authors Carl Moeller of Open Doors and Pastor David Hegg present a surprising reality. The faith of the suffering church is vibrant. There are some remarkable lessons the Western Church can learn from the suffering church. The Privilege of Persecution is available for a donation of $16 to VCY America, which can be made by calling 1-800-729-9829. Ask for the book, The Privilege of Persecution. Again, that number, toll-free, is 1-800-729-9829.
No, we certainly don't want to dilute, that's the word, we don't want to dilute the World War II Memorial's central message by including a prayer by Franklin Roosevelt. You heard it. Yesterday, the Obama administration announced its objection to adding President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's D-Day prayer to the World War II Memorial in Washington. Todd Starnes shares that from Fox News. The objection was noted during a November 3 congressional hearing on Representative Bill Johnson's bill, the World War II Memorial Prayer Act of 2011. Now, Robert Abbey, the Director of Bureau of Land Management, said this: any plaque or inscription of the prayer of President Roosevelt would dilute the memorial's central message and therefore should not be altered. Any inscription of the prayer. I'm going to find out what you people think when we open our phone lines in a few moments. In fact, we're going to open the lines right now if you want to get online and share your thoughts today. But how long do you suppose this country is going to go without the hand of God's judgment coming down upon this country? And sadly, innocent people suffer when wicked people insult the God of our creation. Now, we could talk about this issue of the D-Day prayer. There's a number of news facilities come out with it. Don't forget, this is interesting. Microsoft and Google support striking down the Defense of Marriage Act. That's right. Boston, November 7th. A lawsuit that could nullify the Federal Defense of Marriage Act, DOMA, has received the support of major U.S. corporations who filed a brief opposing the law in federal court this week. The friend of the court brief filed last Thursday in the case of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts versus U.S. Department of Health and Human Services argues that DOMA, which protects marriage as between a man and a woman in federal law, imposes crippling burdens on employers. 70 employers are represented in the brief, including, hang on to your hat now, these are the people that want to strike down the definition of true marriage. And here they are. I'm going to read them. Some of you may recognize, some you won't. Including Microsoft, Starbucks Coffee, Google, and Nike, the sports shoes, Levi Strauss, CBS, Aetna Insurance, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts, Time Warner Cable, Xerox, Zipcar, and Stonyfield Farm. The cities of New York, Boston, and Cambridge are also represented. All of them claiming that DOMA causes unnecessary cost and administrative complexity for employers located in states where same-sex marriage is recognized by law. My comment, who is causing the confusion? Who's causing the complexity when you have all of a sudden same-gender people wanting to be married? First of all, marriage was ordained by God. But when you have people who are godless, they missed the whole definition. And to try to do this in a court of law, have fun. Okay. Life News Life News shares this with us because you know that the eyes of the world have been moving more scrupulously on Planned Parenthood. Well, would you believe Life News reports, Cheryl Sullinger, open records received by Operation Rescue from Kansas Department of Health and Environmental raise more questions than the answer about the recent revelation that documents containing critical evidence against Planned Parenthood in Kansas and mid-Missouri were shredded under the Sebelius administration. Yeah, that's right. Isn't it Kathleen Sebelius, right? Operation Rescue asked that the agency for a broad range of documents and communications between KDHE and Planned Parenthood and or the office of former Governor Kathleen Sebelius, who now serves as President Obama's Secretary of Health and Human Services, and the Kansas Department of Health get this, provided a scant number of documents reflecting an email request from Planned Parenthood asking for information listed on termination of pregnancy forms. It was made on August 10 of 2005. The records show that the Kansas Department of Health, Greg Crawford, complied with the request the following day. This exchange was revealing because of the informal way Costas and Crawford addressed each other and the speediness of the answer from Kansas Department concerning the TOP information. It shows a friendly working relationship that has some apparent history, said Operation Rescue President Troy Newman. Contrast that with the hostility expressed by the Kansas Department in responding to an investigation by a pro-life attorney general's office. And we have a troubling bias and motivation for evidence destruction. That's it. You destroy evidence. You say, well, that's against the law, isn't it? Law? What's that? Just thought I'd raise the question. Well, we have covered most of the items today, but there's many more that you're watching. Of course, Mr. Kane is struggling with the accusations of moral impropriety, and whether or not this is a problem or whether it is something that has been conjured up. You see, it doesn't take a few dollars to hire some people who will even admit to wrongdoing and pose as people that have had improper relationships. Becomes a he said, she said, and before you know it, someone's character is decimated. Remember the guy in the Supreme Court? His name was Clarence Thomas. Remember that? Well, we're going to move right along here. And I see our phone lines are absolutely jamming here, and we're going to open our lines. And right now, we're going to go to Menominee, Wisconsin. We're going to talk with Lee. And Lee, you are on the air. Go ahead.
Hello, Vic. Thank you for taking my call.
Yeah.
You opened your show with this Muslim reporter.
Mm-hmm.
Are not Muslims allowed in the name of their religion to deceive at best and blatantly lie at worst?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's permitted. In fact, you probably receive kudos for telling untruths because you're promoting Islam.
Absolutely. Well, that's all I have to say.
Well, you said a lot in one sentence, Lee. Thank you. God bless you. Thanks for the call. Let's go to Rome, Wisconsin. I didn't say Rome, Italy. Rome, Wisconsin, and talk with Kathy. Kathy, you're on the air. Our phone number, 800-733-9829. Got an open line right now. Hi, Kathy.
Oh, hi. My comment is on the Christmas tree tax. And that comment is that this, I think, makes us a dhimmi nation because, well, dhimmi is that Muslim term for the people that are Jews and Christians that live in Muslim lands that have to pay that special dhimmi tax. And as far as I'm concerned, that's the tax on practicing Christians.
Boy, you're absolutely right. You're right. Because that was one of the provisions. If a what do you call him, an infidel was going to live in a Muslim country, he had to pay a tax on stuff, didn't he?
Yes, that's right. And a tax to just be tolerated. And they were to be kept down, and there was to be, they were to have their privileges removed. The only privileged people were to be the Muslims. And I don't see anything about a Ramadan tax.
Wow. Or a tax on pieces of carpeting.
Right.
Thank you, Kathy. Appreciate that from Rome, Wisconsin. Olney, Illinois. And Dorothy's online. Dorothy, you're on the air.
Yes, please don't cut me off, because what I've got to say is the truth.
As long as it doesn't go too long.
No, it won't. I'll try and talk faster.
All right.
The guys coming back from Iraq and those countries over there that lived there and have lived and got back home, they said what we don't know and they don't tell us is that they had to burn all the Bibles that we sent our troops because the other guys over there that were Muslims saw us reading our Bibles and knew they were Christians, and so they were all shot. And it's just bait, so they wouldn't have a Bible to give them to be a target. And they write back home, as government does. The government knows about this, and they don't tell us. They just write back, and that just someone was killed in action, and they're not telling the truth. And so that's what's happening over there, and we ought to bring every one of them home. And then last year at Christmas, That was they had a secret Congress thing over the Christmas, and they passed the Sharia law bill in this country. It is here, but they don't put the Sharia on the front. They just call it foreign law, and we've got it here. And so over there, if they've got that and they get their foot in the ground here, we ought to just say, well, they've established the religion, and also they have are undesirables. I think England sent away some people back to their country that had naturalized, come over into England and got naturalized, and then when they had their children went back to their old country and started to do that, these Muslims, and they just deported the whole lot.
Thank you, Dorothy. Appreciate that very much, and we are very grateful for your call. I've got calls coming in very quickly, so I've got to move along, but thank you so much from Olney, Illinois. We're going to go to John in West Milwaukee. Our phone number, we do have a couple of open lines right now, but they fill quickly, 800-733-9829. Hi, John. You're on the air.
Yes, to extend her thought there, Qasim Rashind.
Yes,
he is correct that they are a nation of peace.
Oh, yeah.
But that's Soviet style. When everybody else is dead, then there's peace.
You know, there used to be a radio guy, Carl McIntyre was his name, and every morning he would come on, he talked about Khrushchev. He says, remember, Khrushchev is a man of peace. This we all recall. A piece of this, a piece of that, until he has it all.
All right.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you much, John. Appreciate the call. 800-733-9829. Kathy is on line number 2. Kathy, how are you today?
Hi, fine. We're living in perilous times. You know, as Christians, we really need to get focused on what's important, and that is to bring as many people to Christ as possible. I've heard Muslims talk about how they want to put their flag on the White House. I mean, their whole goal is to convert, everybody to Islam, and persecution is coming to America. I mean, we as a nation has forgotten God, and God, I believe that God's hand of blessing has already been taken away, and I just pray, for souls, and for Christians to get right with God, and to just, as long as we have breath and the freedom to speak, the gospel, we need to, to draw more people to Christ. And but people are so focused on the economy, blaming this and that. But we got to get back to what the gospel is. It's Jesus Christ and Him crucified.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you so much from Monroe, Wisconsin. I want to share something with you very quickly. I believe that God does put His hand upon situations and lives, and He does intervene in the affairs of man. When we come back, I'm going to share a little experience personally that was a witness from the Lord to me that every one of us matter to God, and the details of our lives, even the steps that we take, are things that God is concerned about. We'll be right back. This is Crosstalk on VCY.
For the Worldview Weekend Minute, I'm Brandon House. Our website is worldviewweekend.com. Some, quote, Christian, end quote, authors are encouraging you to enter the silence, go into a trance, and encounter Jesus, have a physical confrontation with Him. Do we see in the Scriptures where Christians are to indeed encounter Jesus physically, now, in the flesh? No. In 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 8, we see, whom having not seen you love, though now you do not see Him, yet believing. We also see in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 6 through 8, so we are always confident knowing that while we are at home in the body, we are absent from the Lord. We see in Philippians 1, 22 through 24, Paul again says, but if I live on in the flesh, this will mean fruit from my labor. Yet what I shall choose I cannot tell, for I am hard-pressed between the two, having a desire to depart and be with Christ, which is far better. Nevertheless, to remain in the flesh is more needful for you. Nowhere in the Scriptures do we see that in the flesh we physically encounter Jesus. In fact, I believe they're encountering demons.
And welcome back to Crosstalk. I wanted to share, again, my heartfelt convictions that God rules in the affairs of man, and He cares about your very steps. I have had several instances in my life where it was so obvious that God intervened. And I share this one story with you. For many years, we operated, this is before we owned our own campgrounds, which is now Trail Ridge. But we used to rent space from the state of Wisconsin up at Devil's Lake State Park. And we would engage in what we called Lifeline Camp. And we'd bring boys, strictly boys coming from institutions or off the street or places where they didn't have the opportunity to go in a camp like this. And of course, we had boxing and wrestling and weightlifting and climbing the bluffs. And of course, we did have our Bible sessions and shared the importance of having a personal relationship with the Son of God. And they would listen, and many received Christ. But I remember one morning I got out of the soft-top camper. It's one of these which has the metal things that hold up the canvas top, and of course the cover's folded out like a book, and we had beds on either side. And Mr. McLean and I were in this camper, and all around the camper were tents where we had the guys were sleeping. And it was early, and I heard the birds tweeting and whatever, and I got out of the camper and walked about 10 steps out of the camper and stopped just for a brief moment. And then I heard it like, the trees were like 85 feet tall, huge trees next to us. And I heard this strange crack sound, just like a branch, a small branch, had broken. Didn't have time to think. Because within about, well, as long as it takes for a large branch to fall from the tree to the ground, I heard this crack. And then, as though it was someone just lightly drawing their fingers over the top of my head, just brushed my hair, and there was a log at least 8 feet long, and it hit the ground and broke into 3 pieces. Had I been even a half inch further, my brains would have been all over the ground. And I just said, "Thank you, Lord. Thank you, Lord." There have been other times. I remember at a camp down in Lake Geneva. It used to be called Camp Inspiration at the Lake Geneva Youth Camp. And all the Youth for Christ teams had come together, and we had camp. And on that Sunday morning, I needed to go back to Milwaukee to speak at I think it was the Free Methodist Church that Sunday morning. And I was asked to speak. And I was driving the bus. So one of the guys said, "Hey, I've just got this new 1967 Pontiac with the wide track brakes." And he says, "It's amazing, these new power brakes." He said, "When you get out of the straightaway," he said, "moving along at about 55 or 60, try the brakes and see how quickly it stops." And there I was on a piece of road about 1.5 miles long. And I remembered what Bryce had said. And so I did this and applied the brakes just momentarily. It was amazing. The car came to a stop, not a car in sight either way. And as I once again regained speed, coming around the corner was a pickup truck, pulling a large metal trailer. And I'll never forget, as it came closer, I noticed the trailer began to sway back and forth. And just as within about 3 car lengths, it detached and went across the road in front of me into the ditch. Had I not applied the brakes, I would have been right there when it happened. Tell me that God doesn't intervene in the affairs of life. And when it's God's time, it is appointed unto man once to die. And after that, the judgment. It's appointed. We need to be ready. Enough of my chatting. Let's go back to Greg in Las Cruces, New Mexico. And Greg, you've been patient. How are you?
I'm doing well, Vic. I just want to thank you for taking my call.
Yes, sir.
I just want to exhort the body of Christ right now. We find in the King James, 2 Timothy 2:15, we are told to study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. And if you go back to the first letter that the Apostle Paul wrote to Timothy, he said, "Please, till I give attendance to reading, to exhortation, to doctrine." I'm asking you in this last times and days that we are living in, everybody, please pick up your King James Bible and read.
God bless you, Craig. Appreciate that from Las Cruces, New Mexico, Minneapolis, Minnesota, and Betty, you're on the air. Hi, Betty.
Hi. Yes, I'm just commenting on that Sharia law that suggests that it's okay to lie to non-believers or infidels or whatever. And I believe it's called Taquia.
Yes,
Yes, I don't know if you want to mention that, mention it on the air. Because
well, you just did.
Okay.
That's good.
Taquia, and I can't remember the spelling of it. It's one of those unusual spellings, but I just thought it would be interesting to add that. Because
sure,
that's what they do is, it's promoted to lie, in the name of whatever, Allah or whatever, that it's permissible to do that. So we need to be aware of that. God
bless you, Betty.
Okay, thank you. You too.
How's the weather in Minneapolis?
Oh, it's actually a pretty decent day today.
Great.
Sunny and not too cold yet. But we know it's coming.
Thank you.
Thank you. I really like your program. I love your program. God bless you.
God bless you too. Minnesota, coming up on the weekend. We're going to be in Cook, Minnesota for a big Sunday night Singspiration at the First Baptist Church in Cook. Starts at 6 p.m. If you're within driving distance, we'd love to meet you and bring along your best voice, and we'll sing the praises of God. Let's go to Black River, Wisconsin, and talk to Dolores. Dolores, you're on the air. Hello, Dolores.
Oh, hello.
Yes.
Thank you for taking my call. And I want to just say that I was going into my teenage years when President Roosevelt gave his speech on 1941. And I thought through all these years, through the wars that we have had, why wasn't some of that information that he had in his prayer incorporated with our soldiers that were going and our boys that were going across. It was so heart-rending at that time because the whole country seemed to be in step with him, and he pulled us together he just with God's help, he pulled us together.
Appreciate that so much, Dolores. We've come to the end of a program, and I want to thank you from Black River Falls. Comment there. Again, Anthony in Milwaukee and Ron, I'm sorry we didn't get to you today, but next time, hopefully we can do that. Well, again, our thanks. If you appreciate Crosstalk, take a moment and call your local station or write to them and support them financially, because Crosstalk would not be on the air if we didn't receive freely the airtime to do this. They are sponsoring us. Support them financially. Thanks for joining us on Crosstalk.
You've been listening to Crosstalk via satellite and the internet from VCY America. Views expressed may or may not be those of this station. For a CD of today's program, send a donation of $6 or more to VCY Tape Ministry, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 53208, or download by RSS or podcast from crosstalkamerica.com. And join us again for Crosstalk.